Thank you, Ellen, for that introduction. Too kind. I've got a script. Whenever I do something this short, I write a script because I want to be able to say a lot of stuff within the time. So I'm going to get straight to it. This talk presents practice-based research into the use of surface area as a metric for reasoning about the size of graphics on pages. The technicalities of this are counterintuitive. These two words almost cover this slide, but their black strokes only occupy 20% of its surface area, the same as the solid food form. This slide also has 20% type by surface area that the heavy strokes of this typeface condense the space that the same two words require, allowing for an image which uses 30% of the slide. 50% of the slide is ground. The first principles of proportional graphics are best demonstrated with images. Designs have a tendency to place vertical format images relatively larger than horizontal format images on vertical pages. Paul showed some slides that also demonstrate this principle earlier. Notice the disparity which occurs in these examples from art catalogues, where images are arranged in sequences without text. The same tendency is apparent in the by default forcing of images to column width on web pages. Point is that images, with respect to their content and with respect to other images, are often sized arbitrarily. Some ad hoc practices exist to compensate for this disparity. This book uses a full vertical page to reproduce a detail of a painting. The uncropped painting is shown on another page. It's by Derek Birdsong, who's also used as an example by Paul Oates. He's the man for proportional brackets. I designed this catalogue for artist Camille Onro using the constraint that every page in its plates section would display the same amount of image by surface area. This was achieved using an Adobe InDesign script written for the project by Simon Knebel, who is also one of the contributors to the present research. Notice how the aspect ratio of each image changes in relation to its content. On the third opening, the surface area allowance is shared between images. A productive consequence of this book's design constraint was its practical critique of the rectangle as a format for graphics. If graphic space becomes an artificially scarce resource, the contribution of each part of an image's composition is relativized. John Baldessari's book, Close Cropped Tales, exhibits an exaggerated version of this idea, in which photographs are severely cropped to create an intensive dramaturgy. In the Onro catalogue, less significant compositional elements are pressured to release surface area for other images. On the left here, a section of blank wall is removed to allow the image to be larger, and on the right, the blank section is cut from one image and used to present the detail for another. In typography, we also reason about size by making relations between content and format. Text and image are not identical graphic objects, however. Scale is construed differently in typography because the significance of words is not a function of the number of letters they contain. Even in conventional typographic hierarchy, larger type, as measured by conventional point size, is not necessarily more important, but usually more abstract. Text is structured and sized according to categorical notions of the reader's attention. In the canonical typography manuals of the 20th century are precisely formulated protocols for how type size should be used to differentiate categories of text. Jan Schichold here prescribed ideally 3 and not more than 5 type sizes in a single document. Schichold stated his preferences as matters of sense-making and comprehension. But when these words were written 100 years ago, they were also expressions of economical thinking. Movable metal type for letterpress printing had always been hard capital, a significant investment for the printer who needed to economize on the range of types that they offered. Today, our standards for measuring typographic space are motley. Points, picas, ciceros, fractions of an inch and millimetres must all be accommodated in computerized page layout software. The fact that there is no unified measurement for type size and interlinear space, for instance, is a notable failure of 20th century attempts to rationalize the printing industry. I won't elaborate on this here, but I cover it in my monograph on the Swiss design studio Norm, recently published by Revue Faire in Paris. So that sequence of slides with green backgrounds that I just showed you maintained 20% type, 30% image, and 50% ground proportions. For this next set of slides, the type and image elements are sized not in relation to the total pixel area, but in various proportional relations to each other. Innocent enough, this print advertisement for HGB, an art venue in Berlin, prompted the next phase of the research. It follows standard Schicholdian protocol. Not more than 5 type sizes are used, and information is clearly and categorically differentiated. However, I would suggest that we regard this kind of typography with rather selective seeing. In this case, the standard protocol for structuring information using type size has a negative consequence for the relation between the two exhibitions being announced. They are equally important parts of the institution's program, so that one is afforded much more space simply because its name is longer. In 2023, I taught a seminar in proportional graphics with a typographer at HGB Leipzig. Simon Knebel developed a new InDesign script for the seminar, adding functionality to control the surface area of type. Students designed crude modular typefaces in which each glyph is constructed from the same number of square blocks. This constraint was a technical convenience, not a conceptual device. The InDesign script is simplified by assuming that each letter in a given text box has the same surface area. With this, we had the basis of a method for determining type size not according to arbitrariness, the conventional point sizes, but according to the space occupied by the particular words being set, in relation to images and in relation to the overall amount of space available on the page. We made a publication at the end of the seminar in which page space in square millimeters was allocated using an auction mechanism. After that seminar, I used these tools to typeset a book of verses. In this layout, each verse has the same surface area. Verses with a relatively large number of letters are automatically set in a smaller conventional point size in InDesign, as calculated by the script, in order to achieve the effect. I used the tools again in this book to create a simplistic graphic economy in which each page has an equal amount of type and an equal amount of image. The more images per page, the smaller they become, and the smaller their accompanying numbering. I'm not aware of precedent for using type in precisely this way, but I can show a few examples from the Dutch art publishing scene in early 2000s, which are somewhat related in their modulation of typefaces. This example adjusts its type size to fit. Paragraphs always end exactly at the bottoms of a page. This example defines a standard text box with a particular type size and line length, and then duplicates and manually resizes that text box with its proportions constrained to create various derivative type sizes and column widths to accommodate images. What I mean by that is, let's say this is the default text box. To create the proportions of this text box or that text box, you just click and drag it in InDesign with the proportions constrained. So it takes out the kind of artful gesture of this will be the heading type and this will be the body type. They will just kind of derivative of the initial decisions. To prepare for this conference, Simon and I spent time over the summer further developing our tools, supported by Thibaut Kint, a brilliant intern from CAS in Ghent, who is here today. He pointed to Museum blocky letterforms. I was inspired by seeing this. It's a 1490 painting of the Last Supper by an unnamed German artist in a Gemäldegallery in Berlin. The compositional problem solving in the painting gives a medieval impression. Perspective is distorted in favor of an iconographic organization of space. The main character, Jesus, occupies a prominent position at the head of the table in the upper center of the painting. The composition makes the disciples appear small compared to their idol, but it also creates something like an equality of pictorial space. This prompted me to look into methods for measuring the surface area of non-rectangular shapes. I found this dot planimeter technique used in forestry to estimate the irregularly shaped areas on the mass. By imposing a dot grid and counting the number of dots covered by the shape, it's possible to estimate its area. Alternating the count, including the open dots and excluding the closed dots, smooths out the calculation, compensating for the curving path of the outline. By this method, Jesus and Judas do indeed occupy the same area in painting. Simon, Thibaut, and I set out to consolidate our two existing InDesign scripts and create tools for more freely drawing letterforms. Here you can see our drawing application. In this video, Thibaut has imported a reference image, and as he traces it, the application counts the number of pixels drawn. We developed a technique for determining the surface area of the particular glyphs contained in any given InDesign text box. This meant that we were no longer technically required to use typefaces whose every glyph had the same surface area. But that constraint has persisted anyway, if only because it creates some interesting design formulas. Here is some of Thibaut's early work with our drawing application using different tactics for maximizing and minimizing surface area as necessary across the character set. Thibaut has drawn 4 complete typefaces. You can see in the arrangement at the top right of the slide that the relative lightness of the typeface's stroke and the relative size of its counterforms determines its efficiency on the page, horizontal efficiency. The heavy square typeface is designed just to fit certain words on the green slides at the start of this presentation while maintaining a constraint that they should occupy 20% of the slide's area. These tools are not refined, but they are functional. They can serve as a prototype for proportional graphics. I will make some claims for this concept. Proportional graphics enables precise control the relative size of specific pieces of text and image content in a layout, correcting for distortions introduced by the arbitrary variables of page format and word length. It is a digitally native computational technique. It introduces the prospect of a statistical typography. I have an example of that in the last part of the course. And being already integrated with Adobe InDesign, it could readily be adopted as a feature of industry standard page layout software. But, of course, I do realize that whatever the merits of proportional graphics might be, this idea is going nowhere apart from this conference and a few art publishing conferences. I would use the last part of the talk to say something about why that is. I've researched other novel typographies. This one is called square spans, invented in 1940 by an American college student. This method of chunking sentences into their constituent meaning units anticipated a screen-based reading in which page space would no longer be constrained by the costs of material and labor. In this scheme, which has continued to be developed in obscurity, new typography, typographic permutations would be encoded into texts by authors and selected from by readers without an intermediate role for designers. And irrespective of how spatially inefficient the results. That idea received considerable attention in psychology journals, with studies eager to establish if words presented in square span were read faster or recalled with greater accuracy. A few references to it also appear in modernist typographic discourse, such as in Herbert Spencer's survey The Visible Word, and in a Herbert Weyer monograph, the one that Fraser showed this morning in the Hamlin line, which includes this glorious quote: typewriters and typesetting machines would have to be adjusted to this method. I like to call this the understatement of the typographic century. I typeset some books in square span and taught a seminar on new typography at HfG Karlsruhe in 2019, for which an Adobe InDesign script was developed to semi-automate the process. A book was recently published with material from that seminar. This, too, amounts to nothing more than a curious anomaly in typographic history. To address the question of why novel typographies are destined for obscurity, I will misappropriate a familiar teleology of 20th century media theory. In this diagram, the x-axis is time, and the y-axis is the life cycle and influence of a series of media technologies. Each medium implies or stimulates or enforces a certain range of technical possibilities, and consequently each medium produces something like its own distinct imaginary, its message, as Marshall McLuhan wrote. Friedrich Kittler, in his book Gramophone Film Typewriter, discusses the typewriter's influence on Friedrich Nietzsche's writing imaginary. Our writing tools are also working on our thoughts, Nietzsche had written, and Kittler notes how the machine changed the philosopher's prose, quote, from arguments to aphorisms, from thoughts to puns, from rhetoric to telegram style. But if you ask me, the history of typography should properly be presented like this. The x-axis spans the same period of time, and I label the y-axis for the precise definition of typography as investment of capital, ingenuity, and labor into the development of tools and practices for the economical mass production and distribution of formally consistent pages of text. Instead of being marked by phases corresponding to distinct technological imaginaries, typography is defined by a single accumulation of techniques and products, which a succession of after-the-fact technological advancements only serve more economically to automate. Typography as such ended here, around 1700, to misappropriate the argument of Robin Kinross's book Modern Typography. What we do now is a simulation of typography, which we should call the typographic. The typographic mediates and automates typography, technically abstracting craft from wood, metal, and human labor, while preserving its familiar visual products by default. If you closely inspect the passage of the typographic, you will certainly encounter some noise. Perhaps that tiny hole is square span. That little notch could be Wolfgang Weingart disobeying the strictures of the Swiss forbears. That awkward step, the anarchic, computerized typography of the early 90s. But these are only minor perturbances on the path toward being able to recreate hundreds of hours of the letterpress workshop's labor with a single selection from the drop-down menu. The chronology of graphic design at large has never simply proceeded towards a more complete, practical and conceptual integration of text and image, but continually proceeds instead toward the most economical page that any given set technological conditions can produce. Consider this most reductive set of concrete examples. In 800, the Book of Kells put forth an extraordinarily intricate union of text and image, but by 1450 it was forsaken by Gutenberg's failure or reluctance to print satisfactory illuminations for his Bible. Entrenching a significant division of labor between text and image. In 1800, Thomas Bewick's wood engravings were made stiff enough to be locked up and printed with metal type in a single chase. But by 1950, the demands of the advertising industry had departmentalized text and image again for time-saving purposes, and so on. I'll conclude by saying that our typographic inheritance is so inescapably embroiled with the products of the letterpress workshop, the medieval scriptori, and before, that the experimental, uneconomical typography that I've presented today, despite being arguably an elementary way to conceive of graphic space in computational terms, is practically redundant. And I can be more specific than that. I've described proportional graphics as content-specific, and I would claim it is precisely this which the typographic cannot provide. To be content-specific is by definition to be uneconomical. Even after letterpress printing tripled the density of the page, Gutenberg went bankrupt while Fust and Schoeffer were printing cheaper Bibles with a smaller typeface. Even after the linotype machine quickened the labor of typesetting, phototypesetting could still eke out page space savings by negative kerning between letters. Even as digital graphic design enabled the autonomous practitioner to waste their time concocting labor-intensive, content-specific aesthetic propositions, so capital commodify and corrupted those aesthetic sorting. From all of the accumulated surplus energy which these centuries of economizing and automating have produced, it is still somehow not enough for a typography, but the typographic culture, which is prepared to act on individual particulars of content. 23 minutes.
questions?
Question.
We're a bit hungry and we're a bit squashed. I know I'd have 100 questions, but I'm not going to ask them. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask Jen before we break lunch? Or do you just break you?
No, I'd like someone to ask a question. Yeah. Just a quick one. Yes.
Do you have any plans to make those InDesign scripts or that type tools that you worked on available?
I don't have any plans to do that. I sort of considered doing this presentation a bit more as a gesture, like that, hey, check it out, this cool tool, you could use it too. But I felt actually not convinced by that myself. I find it more interesting to look at why that's a waste of time. Because the square span scripts that I made before, we did try make an effort to share those with you. And it was more, kind of disappointing that maybe it's still just because to do something good with them, they automate something, but they also demand a lot more effort. That they are even by nature not economical ways of doing it. So you could definitely write to me and I could share it if you are that one person.
I guess just as a follow-up comment, I guess I wouldn't undercut. I feel like there are more practical or even capitalistic versions of this, right? I mean, you think of a conference with sponsors and they want to have all the sponsors' logos of different dimensions shown at the same summit.
Yes.
I mean, so I feel like there are very practical uses for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but that's not what you want to do.